Um, yeah, so I think let's jump into it. Can you see my screen fine?
Yeah.
All right. All right, cool. So welcome, guys. We are kicking off a educational series on initially DeFi, and then we'll start getting into other topics around the Solana ecosystem as well. And this first chat is around yield farming. And there's not really anyone better to kick it off with than the biggest decks in Solana, and like the OG platform. Tom, do you? Sorry, fuck, I need to stop that.
No worries.
Info, do you know? Is it fine if I call you by your first name, or do you prefer?
Tom or they both work for me.
Okay, sweet. Tom, when did Raydium actually kick off?
February 21st, 2021 was full mainnet and token release, and so it's been 18 months almost on the dot.
Yeah, so that's just about as old as the Solana DeFi ecosystem itself, eh?
Pretty much. I mean, we were like a first mover on the AMM space, and so I mean, I'll try to not do super like DeFi lingo in this, and kind of if you think I'm going down a rabbit hole, just cut me off and try and have me walk it back a little bit. But in short, like an AMM is an automated market maker, and so that's your standard kind of swap within a pool for one token for the other, and that's like the first layer of what we're going to get into today. Raydium's a bit different though than a lot of the other DEXs or decentralized exchanges in the space, and that all of our liquidity on Raydium is also shared with Serum, and so we're very close partners with the Serum team. It helps people market make or project teams market make on Serum. Anyone who's providing liquidity on Raydium, they have a higher level of capital efficiency, they can earn more fees, they can have a higher yield. And so that's kind of what set us apart on the start, and really why we chose Solana. And then we can kind of unpack everything else, I guess, afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. So is Serum actually a big reason that Raydium chose Solana?
Yeah, I think so. Raydium's team background is kind of unique in the space in that we were kind of working on doing a lot of like actual market making on sexes, and doing a ton of volume there, but also really active in the DeFi space on Ethereum, and like I guess summer 2020 and into the fall. We had an idea for what a product might be, and we wanted to launch a product as well, and we had heard really good things about Solana. And this is like a lot of people who talk about building on Solana. They talk about TPS, they talk about throughput, they talk about low cost, and just like really user friendly ecosystem. At the time, like there weren't any apps on Solana, and so it was kind of like you hear all these things, but you're like, all right, well, are there users yet? Like if we build this thing out and there's no users, what kind of happens? And so it's a bit of a risk. At the time, though, we saw what Serum was able to do, and Serum was really kind of like the first major mover, and the first application on Solana, at kind of when we got started, and to have a fully on-chain order book is something that is incredibly revolutionary for the DeFi space, and it's something that's not been done yet anywhere else. There are teams that are kind of working on it, and we'll see what happens. But it was a Solana first, it was a DeFi first, and it was big. And that was kind of what we looked at and said, this is the possibility to do something really special here. And this is evidence that Solana works as it's intended.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm gonna rein it in a bit from going into Serum order books and what it entails for DeFi. And I think let's start at the absolute step one of what exactly Raydium is. And that essentially starts with liquidity pools that users use to swap tokens, right?
Exactly.
All right. So can you just do like a 1 minute absolute explain like I'm five what exactly a liquidity pool is?
Sure. This is a helpful graphic. I like to use a metaphor kind of a canoe. And on one side of the canoe, you have one token. On the other side of the canoe, you have another token. And that canoe is always going to be balanced. And what an automated market maker is means that at any time, any user can come in and sell one token or buy another token and get the other token in return. When a user does that, the pool then becomes, depending on the size of the swap, it might become unbalanced. But your position will update itself based off of that current price. And so if you visualize this kind of canoe, it might be a little bit weighted on one side, but then it will adjust to the other, and you'll remain in this kind of an equilibrium of the two token prices.
Okay, and are there any risks to a liquidity pool becoming unbalanced, or how does that risk work?
Unbalanced and you like running out of one token, or kind of what do you mean here?
Yeah. So you swap Solana to Sol to USDH, and this pool just starts running out of USDH. How does that work?
Yeah, so that kind of comes down to a liquidity issue, and how much liquidity is in the pool itself. So there is going to be, depending on kind of how much you're swapping, there's going to be potentially price impact. And so that is you losing value against what that quoted token price is, because the size of your swap is too large for the amount of liquidity there. And so there is, kind of like a price risk. But the pool itself is pretty dynamic, and that, for one, there will always be a price for the token. You can never completely sell one token 100%. The price can go nearly to zero, but it can't go all the way there. There's going to be orders to infinity on either side, and it will constantly update.
Okay.
And yeah.
Right. So this is completely dynamic, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely automated, and that's really kind of, what Uniswap did. I mean, it's really revolutionary. And
can we actually? I'm gonna actually jump in and ask you, what did Uniswap do? So why did they change the game?
So I mean, Uniswap, like. So they created the constant product, and that is
in 5 words or less.
Yeah. And so that A equals XY equation that people talk about, you can Google it, you can look at. It's a pricing mechanism essentially, and that's what I'm talking about. It's easier to visualize when you see that it can be effectively priced into infinity, and it's dynamic and it will update, and it's automated. And that's really what they did. And the cool part about it is, like, yeah, you can trade ETH for Sol, you can trade Ray for Sol or USDH or whatever you want. But for things that are not like really liquid, like, you can still create markets for these and be able to sell them. And that's kind of what I think DeFi might grow into, where you kind of have, permission pools, you have smaller things, more niche markets that normally would be really hard to trade, and now you can do it, and you can do it in a way that will always have a price there.
Okay, so basically the idea, the concept of liquidity mining, of yield farming, was born with Uniswap.
Well, it goes back earlier than that,
Okay.
And so yield farming, by definition, is just using one asset to earn a return, and usually it's a return on that same asset. And so a lot of people say it started with compound. I think it goes a little bit further than that with synthetics. But basically, compound, for anyone who's like totally Solana native, compound is kind of like your Solend or your Jet borrow and lending protocol in Solana. You can take USDC, you can lend that token out. Someone can borrow your USDC. It's not all too different, kind of, I guess, from the core user flow of what happens at Hubble. But instead of minting like a stable token with your collateral, you're borrowing against that collateral. And so essentially, kind of like what your user flow on Hubble might be, where you're earning a return for assets provided, or what it might look like on Solana, for example, that's yield farming. Liquidity mining then is when we start to get into what we were just talking about, which is liquidity pools, this constant product curve, and providing liquidity and then yield and then staking that in a farm itself and getting project tokens.
Right. So I think my headset might have muted itself. Apologies for that one. Sorry, Tom. Are you still with us?
I'm here.
All right. So I think we were somewhere around why would a user do liquidity mining and deposit their tokens into pools on Raydium?
Yeah, so I think there's the core thing here is like if you currently own 2 tokens and you can pair those together, you can potentially earn a decent amount of rewards by doing this. And so, I mean, there's 2 levels to this liquidity mining, and one is you just provide 2 tokens and you make a percentage of trading fees. And so on Raydium we charge 25 basis points for each trade. 22 basis points go to someone who's providing liquidity in that pool. So if you have USDH and you have HBB, you want to pair those together, you can provide liquidity on Raydium, and you will earn a percentage of those trading fees. What goes beyond that is kind of a reward token that's given out in a farm. And that's kind of like the rocket fuel that like really propels DeFi. And so that user can take their position and they can put it in the farm, and Hubble and reward that user for providing liquidity on their behalf. And then you earn that project token in return. And that's when you get an annual return, you have an APR, and that's where people who are really DeFi native are shopping around for assets that they hold, and they're figuring out where they can maximize their capital on Solana or elsewhere.
Okay, and the reason that this process occurs is for projects to be able to facilitate swaps between their tokens and another token, essentially, right?
Exactly. It's like, so for a project, say you're an NFT project, for example, and I saw some NFTs in here, say Soul Gods, for example, they want to launch a token. And they're going to give this token to all of their NFT holders and stake it. But the NFT holders, they can't trade the token without there being a liquidity pool there. And for there to be a liquidity pool, there needs to be liquidity. And what that means is the project either has to take a bunch of USDC or SOL and pair that with their token and provide liquidity for the community, which can be very expensive. It can be, a couple $100,000s worth of USDC or USDH or SOL. Or they can take that Soul Gods token and incentivize users to provide liquidity for them. And so they're paying users that project token in exchange for users putting together that USDC and that project token and giving people access to trade.
Okay, that makes total sense. So as a Solana DeFi rookie, what would you say would be the first steps to start doing this? Where do I begin, essentially?
Yeah, so I mean, I would check out like kind of the Raydium's farms page would be like the first one. You go in, you can filter it for APR, you can filter it for the project token that you want. So if you go in here and you go under Fusion, for example, we can look up the USDH pair. So we've got a couple here, right? And so you can say ST Sol, USDH, USDC for a stable pair, which is really low risk, Nova USDH. And so if you have exposure to any of these assets, you can click that Add Liquidity button, create liquidity, and then stake it in the farm there. So if your wallet's connected, you see you have a balance of however much USDH and USDC, you get an LP token, and then you stake it back into the farm. And you'll make on a relatively low risk-free, relatively, I'd say, obviously not financial advice, but on a relatively stable pair, you can earn rewards on your stablecoin assets.
So essentially, I deposit on both sides of this farm. I deposit USDC and USDH on either side of this farm, or this pool rather. But to do this, I obviously need both of these tokens. So let's say I just start with 100 USDC, then I would actually have to go and swap half of that out to USDH. And once that swap goes through, there we go. If that swap goes through, then I go right here, click Add Liquidity, and then on either side of this liquidity pool. So why does this happen?
This is a weird example, and I can explain why this number is off. So,
what would this usually look like?
This is effectively 50 to 50. The price is the same. So when you just did your swap, you got 50 USDH for 50 USDC. But the issue right now, and this is different because this is a stable pair. And so there might be more demand for one token versus the other in a stable pair. And so when you are adding liquidity here, we obviously want those tokens to get balanced or to be rebalanced in terms of how many tokens are in the pool itself. So here it's asking you to deposit more USDH because there's currently less USDH in the pool and people have been swapping for it a lot.
So this essentially means that the USDH demand is up.
For this pool specifically, yeah.
Yeah.
The price is still the same. The price is still 1-to-1 because it's a stable pair, so it's more concentrated in the mid price. And you can kind of think about it like it's not a fully concentrated liquidity pool, but it is similar. So a lot of, when you do your swap, it's still the same price, but obviously when you're adding liquidity, we want you to add more USDH if you can, and yeah, balance it back out.
Yep, that makes sense. So let's actually go ahead and do this. Let's say add this liquidity. And you guys might not be seeing the pop-up. But I just approve it in my wallet, and right there you can see add liquidity confirmed.
And so down below you can see under your liquidity, you have that USDH and USDC liquidity here.
Okay. So what does this mean?
This is your stake in the pool. So what you did is you took those tokens, you took your 50 USDC and your 67 USDH, and you provided that liquidity into the pool. So what you're getting here and what you're looking at is an LP token, which represents your stake in the pool, the total liquidity and how many rewards you will earn.
Okay. So once I've got this, what do I do now?
Now you go back to the farms page, or actually there's a farming button right there on next to add liquidity. You see the piece of grain?
This one right here. Okay.
And then you're at the USDH USDC farm and you can start farming.
Okay. So what does this mean? So I'm staking, I just staked my LP, I approve it in my wallet, and those LP tokens are now staked in this pool.
Exactly.
So what does that mean essentially?
So this is a standard staking program. So if you stake your DGOT, or if you stake your NFT on a project website, or if you do like anything that's kind of distributing rewards per block, this is the same thing. And so you're taking your LP tokens. Hubble says, all right, we care a lot about USDH and USDC liquidity. We want more people to provide liquidity here. So we've created a farm. And this farm means that you put your LP tokens in here. We recognize that you're providing liquidity, and we will give you additional reward tokens in HPP. If you hover over the 8.35% there, you'll see, or you even have it right there as well, what your expected returns are.
Okay. And then there's HPB and there's fees. So what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, so fees are what you get for any user trading in that pool and using your liquidity. So I mentioned this earlier, Raydium does the 25 basis points for a trade, 22 basis points go to the LP. So you trade, someone trades $100, like you just did into the pool, they take 22 cents, and that's distributed to your, to the LP provider.
Okay, so essentially the fees is what I earn for people actually utilizing the liquidity that I deposited.
Correct.
And then the HPB is what the project who has a vested interest in this pool, for example, USDH is Hubble stablecoin. So we as Hubble want to incentivize people to provide liquidity here. And that's where the HPB comes from, right?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. That's a pretty clear overview of exactly how it works. So let's say, for example, we go back here and we actually go to a pool where it's not two stable coins, but it's actually a fusion pool between, say, USDH and ST Sol. So these prices might, the ST Sol price might fluctuate here, and there's this thing called impermanent loss that could potentially occur. So what exactly is impermanent loss? How does that work?
Yeah, Luna, are you still there? Do you want to hop in and cover impermanent loss? Luna is a rock star Raydium contributor. She kind of leads up our community, but she does a lot of education about kind of the risks that's there for yield farming and kind of helping users understand this. And she might be better at this than I am. Are you there, Luna? Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Hey, okay. So I'll try my best to explain this as simply as possible. So I think basically, right, so in a standard liquidity pool, so like what Erica mentioned earlier, basically there always has to be a balance between on both sides. So there'll be like a 50-50 value, right? So this impermanent loss concept, it is something that only applies to someone obviously who is providing liquidity to a liquidity pool, right? Okay, so to make this a bit simpler to understand why it's called impermanent loss, so the impermanent part would be that essentially the loss is not permanent or realized until someone actually withdraws their liquidity. So what would that mean would be that they essentially unstake from the farm, they go back to the liquidity page, which you showed earlier, and then they remove their LP tokens. Essentially what they get back would be the tokens separately. Right.
Okay. So where does the loss itself come from? So how can a loss occur on this pool?
So essentially the loss defined here would be essentially the difference between the price of when you actually provide liquidity into a pool versus if compared to if you just hold both tokens separately. Right? So
Okay.
this really depends on the relative price changes of the pool, the assets in the pool. So let's say if one side actually because it always has to be like a 50-50 balance. So let's say if one token, probably like multiplies by 2 and then the other token's price actually stays the same, that's where the pool would rebalance. And essentially if you remove your liquidity at that point, essentially you would get less of the first token and more of the second token.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And is there any other risk involved in a liquidity pool? For example, on a stable pool, are there risks on stable pools as well, or is this just something to keep in mind for stable, non-stable pairs?
Yep, so definitely there'll be impermanent loss regardless of whichever pair you're in. So once you actually enter a liquidity pool, there's definitely IL incurred. It's just that for stable pools, it's definitely more safe. No, not financial advisor, of course. So I think there would be the risk for stable pools would be in the case of DPEG. That's one. I think everyone, I think the theme for the year we've seen this year so far, the behind of stable coins, that's something to keep a look out for, definitely. And also, I think usually when we actually go into a liquidity pool, some things you want to consider would be usually people try to enter pools where the prices of both tokens usually follow like a correlation. So for example, it may be things like a Ray Soul pool, for example, or you can just chart one token against the other and see whether their price trend follows. So if it's more correlated and in the same direction, then the permanent loss would be lesser. So I think something that's good to consider as well would be, it's a bit hard to visualize like what your potential loss or gains might be. So what I like to advise users to use would be, if you just head to Google and you just simply type in daily DeFi impermanent loss calculator. That's a really handy tool that you can see. Yep. And then, yep, the first link over there. Yep. So this is really handy. We always like to direct people here. You can essentially key in the initial prices of token A and B when you enter the pool. And then you can just, work out various price scenarios of what the future price might be.
So let's do this with like the Sol ST Sol price roughly, right? So
yep.
the USDH ST Sol. So let's say the ST Sol price pumps up to 40 today.
Yeah. So if you scroll down, it will tell you both scenarios. So the first one is if you just held both tokens separately. And the second one would be if you provided that as an LP, what the value would be worth.
Okay.
So you see here that impermanent loss is actually pretty low. It's like 0.14%. So usually, I like to use this to basically gauge like what my potential loss might be. And then if there's a farm for that, right? Whether the APR for rewards would actually outweigh the impermanent loss.
Okay. That is awesome. I did not know this existed. It's definitely a great starting tool for liquidity mining. Awesome. Okay. Cool. So thanks, Luna. By the way, appreciate it. So let's go from doing a explain like on 5 on this into some potential strategies that you can use. And I think a good way to break this up would be for different risk profiles, because there's obviously people who prefer the ultra safe, and then people with a bit more appetite for gains, but also who are willing to take on the risk of loss as well. So a super low risk liquidity pool, Tom, I would imagine would be a USDH, USDC kind of pool where it's just two stable coins.
In terms of like liquidity pools, I'd say stable pairs are probably the best starting ground. You still, I think we talked about risk, and I would say another issue here, and this is something that I think a lot of people kind of forget about, is also smart contract risk, and the potential for an exploit. And so you could come in at any position and say, I'm willing to take X% loss on a Y% move in Sol. Or in ST Sol for the example that we were just using, but then there's kind of unforeseen risk, and that is you are working and using a decentralized platform, and so it is something to keep in mind as well. And so it's always kind of like do your own research and invest in things that you're confident in. I just want to get that out there, so that we're not financial advice line. But yeah, in general, for a stable pair, or even if it's an algo stable or kind of like your standard USDC or USDT, those, or even ST Sol to Sol, M Sol to Sol, those are still considered stable pairs. And so you can kind of look and see which assets you have and what makes sense for you. Rewards, the percentage of your APR is a reflection of like inherent risk there. And so you'll see on stable pair pools, the rewards are smaller. On something that's like a USDC quote token, then the rewards are higher. You can actually flip to like total APR 7-day and get an idea right there for like kind of who's giving out what. And this is like, there's a whole barometer of different risk here.
Okay, so do you think TVL also plays a part in how risky you would consider a pool?
Well, TVL plays a part in what your expected rewards are, because the more TVL there, the less that the less the APR will decrease based off of your position size. And so what you'll see is pools with, generally speaking, with lower APR have more liquidity in them.
Okay, this one's a bit of an anomaly, I would assume.
If you can switch over to like the Raydium tab and get a pretty good idea here. And so I mean, you're looking at like $40 million in this Sol USDC pool, and that is, that's a lot of liquidity. That's a lot of liquidity. And APR comes down because of that.
Okay, and the amount of liquidity that's currently in a pool. For example, let's say you see a pool with 2 million TVL, and you see a pool with 10,000 TVL. Would you consider the pool with 2 million TVL to be substantially less risky?
Not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of different factors here, and it kind of depends on your own risk type and your own like kind of project research. The reason why there could be less TVL could be because it's a small market cap project. It could be because there's not a lot of tokens in their circulating supply currently. It could be like a very small cap project, so there's just not that much liquidity to get into the pool. If you do an IDO and you launch a token with 1% of total supply, and your goal is to get 5% of total supply in your farm, the APR is going to be really high, even if you get all of your available liquidity locked up in that farm. So there's a lot of different factors at play here.
Okay, and is there a risk of being there's this ongoing meme that says if you're in the pool after I think the average leaving time for a pool is like 14 days, something like that. Oh no, it was 48 hours actually. In like degen liquidity mining. So essentially the means is if you're still in the pool after 48 hours, then you are the liquidity. So what exactly does that mean?
So what that means there is that, and this depends with a lot of liquidity, and they farm a bunch of these tokens in the first 48 hours, and then they no longer want this token. They would most likely sell it back into the pool, and then that's going to have downward pressure on the price. This is kind of like, it comes back to a core one of like it's not a DeFi principle, but it's a reoccurring topic that a lot of teams kind of focus on and talk about, and that's mercenary capital, and that's people who come in looking at APR, looking for strategic ways to hedge their risk to one side of the asset, and then they take a lot of that reward token when there's relatively little liquidity in that pool, and the APR is higher. When it starts to fall off, and they take profit and they leave, and they'll kind of bounce around. And so, there's a lot of people who follow wallets on Ethereum. There's people who are starting to do it on Solana. There's a couple of different pools that have incentives on a lot of different platforms, and you can watch liquidity kind of bounce around a little bit and see where it's going and kind of see what it's doing.
Okay, and essentially, if the majority of liquidity gets withdrawn from a pool, then there's a chance you could be the last one remaining. There is that risk, right?
Yeah, and so it's all relative to the size of your position. And like the last one remaining, they can still withdraw their liquidity. But when there's less liquidity in the pool, you have more price volatility, and there's less support there for your token price. And so if you're comparing a pool with $50 million of liquidity in it versus $1,000 of liquidity in it, you do a $100 swap in one pool versus the other, you're going to have vastly different prices. And when you're providing liquidity there, the price within the pool itself is going to be changing. And so when you're withdrawing or you're interacting with a pool that is low liquidity, it's always very important to double check the price of when you're providing liquidity and then when you're withdrawing liquidity. Being very cognizant of that, and making sure you're not overexposed compared to what you should be normally.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'll just get into a one final question, and that's more into Raydium itself, because you guys are OGs, as we said earlier. So what do you see the future of Raydium as being, and how do you see the future of yield farming on Raydium looking?
Yeah, so this is like a pretty good timing for this question. So if you flip over to the ecosystem tab here, this is something that we just launched a couple of days ago. And so our vision of DeFi is that, if it's not permissionless, it's not DeFi. Decentralized finance means that anyone should be able to do what they want and be able to have a token trading. We were the first on Solana to launch permissionless pools, which means anyone can create a market and have liquidity there for their token. And we were not the first to create a farm, to do permissionless farms, but this allows any project team to come in and create a farm. And so I'd say for yield farming, our expectation is that it moves to a permissionless model, and it gives project teams more freedom and autonomy over how they want to distribute rewards. I think beyond that as well, and then we can kind of like get into, this is like, might go down a DeFi rabbit hole, but changing the way that emissions or reward tokens are distributed. maybe having it be more user behavior focused, so having them be vested, so people who have their LP tokens in a farm for a longer period of time get a larger percentage of the overall rewards, or they could be option based where you're actually calling like a call option there to claim their token with USDC or USDH, and effectively paying for the token at a discount to reward loyal members of the community, and kind of get away from that mercenary capital that we talked about.
Okay, so it's basically moving towards a more sustainable model of emissions. So prices aren't just down only, as we saw a lot of project tokens being over the past, say, year and a half in DeFi.
I mean, so that's a larger question that kind of falls into individual product token utility, and kind of what an individual team has planned for their token itself. And so I think it's a bit of a case by case basis there. I do think though that the DeFi landscape and ecosystem is becoming more mature. And so with that, like users are becoming more educated. We're doing more and more conversations like what we're doing now and explaining, risk. We're explaining potential reward, but we're allowing users to make decisions for themselves. And that's going to influence how projects ultimately develop, and kind of move forward in this space.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think it's awesome what you guys are doing, especially with these ecosystem farms. It's definitely a massive step. Yeah, and bullish on Raydium. Massive fans of what you guys are building, and looking forward to what the future holds. Yeah. Thanks for coming on, guys. We're gonna wrap it up right there. Tom or Luna, I don't know if you guys have anything else that you would like to add.
I'm all good. Thank you so much for putting this together. It's great to chat with you guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you guys in real life this weekend. Let's get a beer or a coffee and talk some DeFi stuff.
Yep. Before we wrap up, actually, I just got back to the Discord chat and I see that there's quite a few people here. Is there anyone who has a question for either Tom or Luna about yield farming or Raydium in general? All right. That is a resounding time to wrap it up.
There might be a
indicator. Sorry, come again, Paul?
Yeah, no, I'm just checking the chat. So there was one question we had from a user. So user spectator was asking, is there a risk of withdrawing a large amount from the liquidity pool at one single time?
So I think that's probably referring to a rug pull. I mean, there is risk there. And that's kind of like, I mean, our recommendation is always to, obviously, like, you don't want to go into things blindly. And there's like risk is usually priced in. And so when you're looking at, an APR that's excessively high, it's a project team that you don't know a lot about, go into every investment that you have with a plan, a worst case scenario kind of situation of how you will respond if something does go, the off chance that it does go the way it does. And I think that's like something that we really need to get better at, is thinking about kind of like, I have now exposure to this token. What do I do to make sure that I'm in like a pretty risk neutral position? And so, I mean, anytime, like even with a liquidity pool, like it's not just a project team withdrawing all their liquidity. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a rug pull. That could mean that they're returning their USDC for the treasury, that they, open this up to start trading. They started a farm. Now people have their token and they can take those tokens back out of circulation and put them back into their emissions treasury, for example. But then a team as well, they could take their tokens and just sell them into the pool, and that's something that's very similar. And so it's kind of invest with confidence and go into it with a plan and kind of knowing what your risk appetite is for any given thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But maybe perhaps as a user, real quickly, if you as a user withdraw a large amount from the pool at once, not like a project, but is it similar, the effect, or anything
Oh yeah.
change?
So that comes back to the price of what that token will be when you actually remove that liquidity. And you can see that on the UI, and you can see if it's in line with current market price. What Raydium will do actually is it will make you withdraw your liquidity in a couple of different transactions. So say, for example, on the USDH, like Paul's high roller, big whale on the USDH, USDC pool, he's got $500,000 of that TVL that's in there. If he goes to withdraw that all at once, it will make him split that up into smaller transactions. And that's a user flow that doesn't happen all too frequently on Raydium. But every once in a while, we do get some questions there. Our recommendation, though, is if you go down and you say, oh, you got staked, your tokens are in the farm anyway. But if you go to remove liquidity, it will give you a price there and give you an estimate for what you'll be receiving on either side.
Sweet. Thanks.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Luna, as well for dropping in. We'll wrap it up right here. Appreciate you guys joining in. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. If you have any questions beyond those that were covered in the talk, drop into the Raydium Discord. They will definitely be able to answer anything. And I'll link the yield farming article that we wrote and published today as well, which goes over the bare bones basics of what exactly yield farming is. And yeah, as you saw, we have quite a few pools on Raydium as well, and you can see all the rest of the Hubble pools on the stats page on the Hubble app if you want to go check those out. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks guys for dropping in, and we'll see you at the next one. Cool.
Thanks so much for having us.